the millionaire and the beggar woman who changed his life along the road forever. Richard Matthews, a name whispered in hushed tones in Manhattan's elite circles. Cardiologist extraordinaire, Upper East Side penthouse owner, life of unbelievable luxury. But behind that glossy veneer, a soul drowning in quiet desperation. The Central Park view? Just another gilded cage. Family legacy? A crushing weight on his shoulders. Then came that night. Rain lashing down. Streets slick as ice. Richard, cocooned in his Aston Martin, a fortress of leather and steel. Suddenly, bam! A figure darted from the shadows. A woman, soaked, shivering. Sarah Miller, a nurse, he later found out, grinding double shifts at St. Jude's, a Bronx hospital on its last legs. Desperate to flag a cab, invisible to everyone except him. Something snapped, an impulse, a reckless, life-altering decision. He offered her a ride. Inside the car, a world away from her own, Sarah's warmth radiated. She spoke of her patients, their struggles, their small victories. Her dedication, her realness, slammed into Richard like a tidal wave, a stark contrast to the perfectly polished, soul-crushing superficiality that defined his existence. Dropping her off at her tiny apartment, a pang he hadn't felt in decades, hit him squarely in the chest. Guilt? Maybe. Awakening? Definitely. He couldn't shake the image of her tired but resolute face. The city lights seemed to mock his own emptiness. The next day, against all reason, he found himself in the Bronx, St. Jude's, a crumbling building in a forgotten corner of the city. He watched her from afar. Sarah, tireless, selfless, a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. That evening, a large anonymous donation landed in St. Jude's. Jude's account. A drop in the bucket, maybe, but Richard hoped it would ease her burden, just a little. But then he saw her, a face he thought he'd buried deep in his past, a woman he hadn't seen in over 30 years, standing in the hospital lobby. A connection, a secret link that tied Richard to St. Jude's, a link he thought was long gone, a link that, if revealed, could shatter his carefully constructed world into a million pieces. What dark secret is Richard hiding? And how will Sarah fit into all of this? Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. E faz uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários, de qual cidade você está assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. What dark secret is Richard hiding? And how will Sarah fit into all of this? He just stood there, frozen. The woman, it couldn't be. Margaret, his Margaret? After all this time? She looked older, of course, lines etched around her eyes. But that smile, that damn smile was unmistakable. He ducked behind a potted plant, heart hammering against his ribs. What was she doing here? After everything? The past he'd worked so hard to bury was suddenly standing right in front of him, alive and breathing. He had to get out of there. before she saw him, before everything blew up. He turned to bolt, and that's when he bumped right into Sarah. "Dr. Matthews?" She looked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, trying to come up with a plausible excuse. "Just, checking things out, seeing if I could help in any way." Pathetic. Margaret turned, and their eyes met. Time stopped. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by a wave of... Was that anger? Hurt? "Richard?" Her voice was a rusty whisper. "Is that really you?" He swallowed, feeling like he was choking on dust. "Margaret, what's going on?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. She looked from Richard to Margaret, clearly confused. Then it happened. Margaret took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "He's my son," she said, her voice ringing through the small lobby. "Richard is my son that I gave up for adoption over 30 years ago, and he never bothered to look back." The air crackled with shock. Sarah gasped. A nearby janitor dropped his mop. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His secret was out. The carefully constructed lie he'd lived for decades was collapsing around him. He was exposed. A fraud. That's not true," he sputtered. But the words sounded weak, unconvincing even to his own ears. "Oh, it's true, Richard," Margaret said, her voice laced with bitterness. "And I know exactly why you never came looking for me. Your adoptive parents paid me a fortune to disappear, to stay away. They didn't want the scandal of their perfect little doctor having a poor mother." Richard recoiled as if she'd slapped him. The shame washed over him, hot and suffocating. He wanted to disappear, to crawl into a hole and never come out. Sarah stared at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. The realness he'd admired in her eyes was now replaced with something else. Pity? Disgust? He couldn't tell. I didn't know," he stammered, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He'd known, of course. He'd always known. Margaret laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Of course you didn't. Why would you? It's easier to pretend the past doesn't exist, isn't it?" She turned to Sarah. "He's a good man, really. He helps people. Just don't expect him to be honest about who he really is." And then she walked away, leaving Richard standing there, exposed and broken, in the wreckage of his perfect life. Leaving Sarah with a look of utter disbelief on her face. What now? What was Sarah thinking? He had to know. But what would he say? How could he explain? The weight of it all was crushing him. He just stood there, frozen. What now? What was Sarah thinking? He had to know. But what would he say? How could he explain? The weight of it all was crushing him. Sarah's eyes. They weren't disgusted. Not exactly. They were confused. "Richard," she said, in voice barely a whisper, "is any of that true?" He looked at the floor. Couldn't meet her gaze. "It's complicated." Complicated? That was the best he could do? After that bombshell? He felt like dirt. Then Sarah did something unexpected. She reached out and touched his arm. A gentle touch. "Richard, look at me." He raised his head slowly. Her eyes, they held compassion? How could she possibly feel compassion for him right now? "Tell me the truth," she said. "Everything." He took a deep breath. The truth. He hadn't spoken it in decades. Could he even remember how? They paid her, he started, his voice rough. My adoptive parents. They paid her to disappear. They didn't want anyone knowing about her. Sarah's grip tightened slightly. And you, what did you want? He closed his eyes. I was a kid, Sarah. They told me she didn't want me, that she'd abandoned me. I believed them. Another lie, a half-truth at best. He'd suspected deep down that something wasn't right. But it was easier to believe the lie. Easier than facing the truth. And now, Sarah asked, what do you want now? He opened his eyes, finally meeting her gaze. I don't know. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Shouting. A crash. Richard and Sarah turned. Everyone was staring. Two men, dressed in sharp suits, were wrestling with Margaret. Near the front doors, one of them shoved her hard. She stumbled, hitting her head on the corner of a metal desk. She crumpled to the floor. Silence. Then, a blood-curdling scream. Sarah rushed forward. Richard followed, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah knelt beside Margaret, checking her pulse. Her face was grim. Call 911, now, she yelled. Richard pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. He dialed, his voice trembling as he gave the address. Then, he looked at the two men in suits. They were gone, vanished. He knelt beside Sarah, next to Margaret. Her eyes were closed. Her face was pale. Margaret? He whispered. Margaret, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. She opened her eyes, focusing on Richard with difficulty. Richard, she gasped, her voice weak. They know. No. Know what? He was about to ask when her eyes widened in terror. She reached out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. The will, she croaked. It's not what you think. Then her eyes glazed over. Her grip loosened. Her hand fell limp. Sarah checked her pulse again. Her face was grave. She's gone, Sarah said softly. Richard stared at Margaret's lifeless face. The mother he'd never known. Gone. Just like that. But what did she mean? The will. It's not what you think. What will? What was she talking about? And who were those men? Why did they push her? What did they know? He felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about a long-lost mother. This was something bigger, something darker. And he was right in the middle of it. But how? What was going on? What will was she talking about? What if Sarah was in danger? He just stared at her. Lifeless. Gone. And those words echoing in his head. The will. It's not what you think. What did she mean? Sarah, still kneeling, looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and questions. Richard, she said softly, what was that all about? What will was she talking about? He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his brain. I don't know, Sarah. I honestly don't. I didn't even know she had a will. Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The paramedics were on their way. Richard knew he had to get out of there. The police would be asking questions. Questions he couldn't answer. Not yet. Sarah, I have to go, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll call you later. Please, just be careful. He turned and practically ran out of the hospital, leaving Sarah kneeling beside Margaret's body, surrounded by chaos and confusion. Back in his Aston Martin, he floored it, the engine roaring as he sped away from St. Jude's. He had to find out what Margaret meant about the will, and who those men in suits were. He drove straight to his penthouse, the Central Park view now a cruel reminder of his shattered life. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He went straight to his study, a room filled with leather-bound books and expensive artwork. He'd always seen it as his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of his life. But now, it felt like a trap. He started searching online, frantically Googling Margaret's name, hoping to find some clue, some piece of information that would explain what was happening. And then he found it. An obituary. Margaret Miller. It listed her surviving relatives, a daughter, Emily Carter, and a grandson, Daniel Carter. He froze. Carter? That name? It sounded familiar. Very familiar. He scrolled through his contacts on his phone. There it was. Daniel Carter, a young, ambitious lawyer who worked for him at the Matthews Foundation. His blood ran cold. Daniel Carter was Margaret's grandson? His own employee? But why? Why would he hide that? Why work for him? Then it hit him. The will. Margaret's will. Daniel was after something. Something Richard had. Something Margaret had left behind. He had to talk to Daniel. He grabbed his phone and dialed Daniel's number. "Hey, Dr. Matthews," Daniel answered, his voice cheerful. "What's up?" "Daniel, I need you to come to my penthouse. Now," Richard said, his voice tight. Sure, Dr. Matthews. Is everything okay?" "Just get here, Daniel." He hung up, his heart pounding. He had a bad feeling about this. A very bad feeling. Within minutes, Daniel was at his door. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room. "Dr. Matthews, what's going on?" he asked. Richard took a deep breath. "Daniel, I know about Margaret Miller," he said, watching Daniel's face for a reaction. Daniel's eyes widened. He swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Daniel. I know she was your grandmother." Daniel's shoulders slumped. He sighed. "Okay, fine. Yes, she was my grandmother. But I don't know why you're bringing this up." "Because she was murdered, Daniel, and I think you know something about it." Daniel's face turned pale. "What? Murdered? I had no idea." Richard studied him, trying to gauge his reaction. Was he telling the truth? Or was he a brilliant liar? "She said something before she died, Daniel. She said the will, it's not what I think." "What did she mean?" Daniel hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. I can't tell you, Dr. Matthews. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous? What's so dangerous about a will?" Suddenly, the door to the study burst open. Two men in suits rushed in, guns drawn. "Don't move!" one of them shouted. Richard and Daniel froze, their eyes wide with terror. The men advanced, their faces grim. "We know about the will, Matthews," one of them said, "and we know you know about it too." Richard's mind raced. This was it. He was going to die. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing one of the men's guns. A shot rang out, but it wasn't Daniel who fired the gun. It was Sarah. She stood in the doorway, a gun in her hand, her face a mask of fury. "I heard everything," she said, her voice shaking, "and I'm not going to let you hurt them." Richard stared at her in disbelief. Sarah? With a gun? Where did she get that? But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was who she was aiming at. Not the men in suits, but Daniel. "I know what you did, Daniel," she said, her voice cold and hard. "You killed your own grandmother." "I know what you did, Daniel," she said, her voice cold and hard. "You killed your own grandmother." Silence. Daniel's face crumpled. "No, that's not true. I loved my grandma." But something in his eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was guilt. Raw, ugly guilt. The men in suits, they just stood there, frozen, like statues. What was going on? "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was reeling. Could this really be happening? Sarah ignored him. Her eyes were locked on Daniel. "The will," she said. "It wasn't about money." Was it? It was about something else, something she was going to reveal. Daniel started to sob, big, gulping sobs. "It was an accident, I swear. We were arguing about the foundation. She was going to expose everything. And she fell." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Expose everything? What was going on at the Matthews Foundation? What had his family been hiding? Then, one of the men in suits moved. Quick as lightning, he grabbed Daniel, shoving him towards Sarah. "Kill her, kid," he snarled, "or we'll kill you." Daniel's eyes widened in terror. He looked at Sarah, then at the gun in her hand. He lunged. Sarah reacted instantly. She fired. The bullet hit Daniel square in the chest. He crumpled to the floor, dead. More silence. Thick, heavy silence. Then, Sarah turned to Richard. Her face was blank, empty. "I'm sorry," she said. "I had to." He just stared at her. The woman he'd admired. The woman who'd shown him what real life was about. She just killed a man. And then the really shocking thing happened. She smiled. A slow, chilling smile. "You really thought I was just a nurse, didn't you, Richard?" she said, her voice suddenly smooth and sophisticated, like she was a completely different person. Who are you?" he stammered. She laughed. A cold, heartless laugh. "Let's just say, I'm someone who's been waiting a very long time for this." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a badge. An FBI badge. "Agent Miller," she said, flashing the badge. "I've been investigating the Matthews Foundation for years. Your family, they're not who you think they are, Richard. They're involved in some very shady stuff." His head was spinning. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a dream. "But you helped me," he said. "You showed me what was important." She shrugged. "That was just part of the act, honey. You were the key to getting to them. And now, I have everything I need." She gestured to the men in suits. "Take him," she said. "He knows too much." The men grabbed Richard, pulling him towards the door. He looked back at Sarah, his eyes filled with betrayal. "Why?" he asked. "Why do this to me?" She just smiled again, that same cold, chilling smile. "Because, Richard," she said, "your family ruined my life, and now I'm going to ruin theirs." And as they dragged him away, he knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. He didn't even know Sarah. Was anything she had ever told him real? Or had his life been a lie all along? And as they dragged him away, he knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. He didn't even know Sarah. Was anything she had ever told him real? Or had his life been a lie all along? The elevator doors slammed shut, leaving Richard alone with the two goons. They didn't say a word, just stared straight ahead, their faces like granite. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Where were they taking him? And what were they going to do to him? The elevator descended rapidly. Richard's mind raced. Sarah? An FBI agent? It was insane. But the way she handled the gun, the coldness in her eyes, it was all too real. The doors opened onto the underground parking garage. Cold, concrete, and echoing. Perfect for, well, he didn't even want to think about it. They shoved him into the back of a black SUV. No windows. He was trapped. The drive was a blur. He tried to keep track of the turns, but it was no use. He was completely disoriented. Fear clawed at his throat. Finally, the SUV screeched to a halt. The doors opened. He was yanked out, stumbling onto uneven ground. He looked around. He was in some kind of abandoned warehouse. Dimly lit, with rows of crates stacked high. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. This was it. End of the line. The two men pushed him towards a figure standing in the center of the warehouse. Tall, imposing, with his back to him. "You know, Richard," the figure said, turning slowly, "I always had such high hopes for you." Richard's breath caught in his throat. It was his father. But his father had been dead for years. Dad? But how? He stammered, completely bewildered. His father smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Let's just say, death is a complicated business, Richard, just like life." Richard's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His dead father standing before him, in an abandoned warehouse. It was impossible. "You see, Richard," his father continued, his voice smooth as silk. "The Matthews Foundation is more than just a charity. It's a legacy of power, a legacy that you were supposed to carry on." Richard shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his brain. "But the FBI, Sarah," his father chuckled. "Sarah? She's a pawn, Richard, a useful idiot. She thinks she's taking us down, but she's just playing right into our hands." "What are you talking about?" Richard pleaded, his voice trembling. His father sighed. "It seems you're even more naive than I thought. The Matthews Foundation is involved in things you couldn't possibly imagine, Richard. Things that are far beyond your comprehension." Then his father stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Richard's. "But you were always a loose end, a risk. You had to be dealt with." He gestured to the two men. They moved forward, their faces expressionless. Richard closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But then a voice rang out from the darkness. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Matthews." Everyone froze. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Tall, slender, elegant. Margaret. But she was dead. He saw her, on the floor of the hospital, dead. Margaret? Richard whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Margaret smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Hello, Richard. Long time no see." His father's face twisted with fury. "You! How are you still alive?" Margaret shrugged. "Let's just say I'm a survivor, and I know all your secrets, David. Every single one." Then she turned to Richard. her eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret. "There's so much you don't know, Richard. So much that I should have told you a long time ago." "But you're dead," Richard stammered. "I saw you." "A trick," Margaret said softly. "A necessary trick, too. Protect you." She paused, taking a deep breath. "David is not your father, Richard." The warehouse went silent. Richard stared at Margaret, his mind reeling. "What?" he whispered. "What are you saying?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "David, he kidnapped you, Richard. You were my son, yes, but not his. Your real father was someone else entirely, someone powerful, someone dangerous." Then she stepped forward, her voice barely audible. "Your real father is the President of the United States. Your real father is the President of the United States." Silence hung heavy in the warehouse. "My father? The President?" It was insane, completely and utterly insane. I looked from Margaret to David, the man I thought was my father, his face a mask of rage. "Lies!" David screamed, veins bulging in his neck. "All lies. She's trying to confuse you, Richard. Don't listen to her." But I was listening. I had to. The pieces were starting to click into place, twisted and grotesque as they were. The power, the influence, the Matthews Foundation's shady dealings. It all pointed to something bigger, something connected to the highest office in the land. Margaret took a step closer to me, her eyes pleading. "It's true, Richard. His name is President Thompson. He was young, ambitious. We had an affair. David found out. He was obsessed with power, with legacy. He kidnapped you, hoping to use you to control Thompson. But Thompson wouldn't be controlled." David lunged at Margaret, roaring like an animal. But before he could reach her, a figure stepped in front of her, one of the goons. He grabbed David, holding him back with surprising force. "Enough, Dad," the goon said, his voice cold and emotionless. "What? What did you call me?" David asked him. My head swam. The goon, calling David his dad. The pieces were starting to connect. "You're one of his sons?" I looked to Margaret with pleading eyes. Margaret looked down with shame and tears rolling down her cheeks. David looked at the goon with fire in his eyes. "How could you do this to me after all I've given you?" "Quiet, Dad. It's over," the goon said with an emotionless tone. Then something even more shocking happened. Sarah, the FBI agent, the woman who'd led me down this rabbit hole, stepped forward. She raised her hand, and the goon instantly released David. She looked at me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of sadness, regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "It's time for you to know the truth, Richard." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "President Thompson knows you're alive. He wants to meet you." "Meet me?" I stammered. "But why, after all this time?" She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Because, Richard, he's dying, and he has something to tell you, something that will change everything." Just then, a helicopter landed outside the warehouse, and the wheels churned and spun dirt up into the abandoned warehouse. The doors opened, and two men in suits stepped out. They approached me, their faces grim. "Mr. Matthews," one of them said, "the president is waiting." I hesitated, my mind racing. Was this a trap? Was I walking into another lie? But I looked at Margaret, her eyes filled with hope. I looked at Sarah, her face unreadable, and I knew I had to go. I had to find out the truth. As I walked towards the helicopter, I glanced back at David. He was being led away by the other goon, his face a mixture of defeat and rage. He screamed, "Don't trust them. They're all liars." I ignored him, climbing into the helicopter. The engine roared to life, and we lifted off, leaving the warehouse, the lies, the betrayals behind us. As we flew towards Washington, D.C., I couldn't help but wonder what President Thompson wanted to tell me. What secret had been hidden for so long? And why now? Then the pilot came into the cabin. I recognized him as another one of David's goons from the warehouse. "I hope you enjoy your helicopter ride, Mr. Matthews, because it's going to be your last." He pulls out a gun, aims it at me, and cocks it. "I hope you enjoy your helicopter ride, Mr. Matthews, because it's going to be your last." He pulls out a gun, aims it at me, and cocks it. Time seemed to slow down. My life flashed before my eyes. The penthouse, the fast cars, the emptiness, and Sarah. Was any of it real? Did any of it matter? But then, something incredible happened. The pilot, he hesitated. His eyes flickered with doubt. "I can't do it," he mumbled, his voice barely audible above the roar of the engine. "What did you say?" I asked, my heart pounding. He looked at me, his face etched with torment. "I can't kill you, Mr. Matthews. I just can't." He lowered the gun. I couldn't believe it. A sliver of hope in this nightmare. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "Thank you." But then the radio crackled to life. A harsh, commanding voice filled the cabin. "What's going on up there? Report." The pilot froze. He looked at the gun, then at me, then back at the radio. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I had a change of heart," he stammered. "I can't do it." The voice on the radio exploded. "You idiot! You know what's at stake. Do it now, or you're a dead man." The pilot's face contorted with fear. He raised the gun again, his hand shaking violently. "I'm sorry, Mr. Matthews," he whispered. "I have to." Suddenly, the helicopter lurched violently. We were thrown sideways, slamming against the cabin walls. "What the hell was that?" the voice on the radio screamed. The pilot wrestled with the controls, his face pale. I don't know. Something's wrong with the engine." We were losing altitude, fast. The ground was rushing up to meet us. "Mayday, mayday, we're going down!" The pilot yelled into the radio. But it was too late. The helicopter crashed. Everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed. My head was throbbing. My body ached. I looked around. White walls, sterile smell, the familiar beep of machines. A nurse rushed to my side. "You're awake! Thank God!" "What happened?" I croaked. "You were in a helicopter crash," she said. "You're lucky to be alive." "The pilot?" She shook her head. "He didn't make it." I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Another life lost, another victim of this madness. Then the door to my room opened. Sarah walked in, but this time she wasn't wearing an FBI badge. She wasn't smiling that chilling smile. She looked different, vulnerable, scared. "Richard," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Everything I told you, about being an FBI agent, about investigating your family. It was a lie. My heart stopped. I'm not an agent, she continued, her voice trembling. I'm your sister. Your sister? I repeated, my voice cracking. What are you talking about? Margaret had only one child. No, she had two, after everything went down with President Thompson and your kidnapping. Margaret was pregnant again, with me. David and his men found out, and he forced her to give me up as well. I grew up in foster care, and lived my entire life trying to find the family that was stolen from me. She looked down, with tears streaming down her face. I followed you, Richard, because you were my only shot. I'm sorry, Richard. I never meant for you to get hurt. I was so angry with your family, and everything snowballed. I was the one talking on the radio. I tried to crash the helicopter, but something went wrong. Please tell me you can forgive me. Your sister? I repeated, my voice cracking. What are you talking about? Margaret had only one child. No, she had two, after everything went down with President Thompson and your kidnapping. Margaret was pregnant again, with me. David and his men found out, and he forced her to give me up as well. I grew up in foster care and lived my entire life trying to find the family that was stolen from me. She looked down with tears streaming down her face. I followed you, Richard, because you were my only shot. I'm sorry, Richard. I never meant for you to get hurt. I was so angry with your family, and everything snowballed. I was the one talking on the radio. I tried to crash the helicopter, but something went wrong. Please, tell me you can forgive me. Forgive her? She'd lied to me, used me, almost killed me. But looking at her, seeing the raw pain in her eyes, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. We were both victims, pawns in a game much bigger than ourselves. Why? I managed to choke out. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? We could have worked together. She shook her head, tears still streaming down her face. I was scared, Richard. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know if you were like them. Just then, a doctor rushed into the room, his face grave. We need to get you into surgery, Mr. Matthews. Now, there's internal bleeding. Surgery? I hadn't even processed how badly I was hurt. Everything was happening so fast. As they wheeled me away, I looked back at Sarah. She was standing there, watching me, her face a mask of despair. Sarah, I yelled, find President Thompson. Tell him everything. Then the doors swung shut, and I was plunged into darkness. The next few hours were a blur of pain, needles, and blurry faces. I drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by fragmented images of the crash, of Margaret, of Sarah's betrayal. When I finally woke up, the room was quiet. The machines were beeping softly. I felt weak, but alive. A figure was sitting in a chair beside my bed, an old man, his face lined with worry. President Thompson. Richard, he said, his voice raspy. I'm so glad you're alive. I stared at him, speechless. My father, the President of the United States. I know this is a lot to take in, he said, but there's no time for explanations. There's something you need to know. He leaned closer, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. David Matthews. He wasn't just trying to control me. He was trying to control the world. He paused, taking a shaky breath. The Matthews Foundation. It's not just about money. It's about power. They've been manipulating global events for decades, pulling the strings behind the scenes. They control governments, corporations, even the media. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They're trying to create a new world order, Richard. One where they're in control, and they're willing to do anything to achieve it." He paused again, his eyes locking onto mine. "And now they're planning their final move, a move that will change everything." Just then, the door to the room burst open. Two men in suits rushed in, guns drawn. "President Thompson, get down!" one of them yelled. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, one of the men raised his gun and fired. Not at President Thompson, at me. The bullet ripped through my chest. Pain exploded through my body. I gasped for air, my vision blurring. Then I saw it. The shooter, his face. It was Sarah. But it wasn't just Sarah. It was Sarah and me. She was my twin. A twin I never knew existed. And as I looked into her eyes, I understood everything. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about power. This was about something much, much bigger. This was about destiny. And our destiny was to destroy each other. Her twin? My twin shot me? It burned, man, like nothing I'd ever felt. Sarah's face, mixed with mine? It was crazy. I coughed, blood bubbling up. Everything was fading. President Thompson, he was staring at her. His eyes were filled with, what? Sadness? Regret? Maybe both. He knew all of this. The suits were scrambling, guns drawn. But it was too late. I was going. Then I saw it. Sarah, the real one, my Sarah. She was fighting them. A fury I'd never seen. She was yelling, screaming. Something about family, about lies. She'd figured it out. I wanted to tell her, to thank her, but I couldn't. My vision tunneled. Everything was going dark. But then I heard a voice, soft, familiar. Margaret? She was standing there, shimmering, like a ghost, smiling. "It's okay, Richard," she whispered. "It's not the end." She reached out her hand. I took it. And then, nothing. A beeping. A light. I woke up. Not in the hospital. Somewhere. Different. White walls, yeah, but cleaner. Brighter. Almost heavenly. A figure was standing by the window. Tall. Imposing. He turned. President Thompson. But younger. Stronger. "Welcome, son," he said. "Welcome home." He smiled, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. A new beginning. A beginning I never saw coming. But where was Sarah? And that's it. Or is it? What really happened to Richard? Where's Sarah? Is this a trick? What is going on? You need to know what's next, and the only way to do that is to smash that subscribe button right now. You cannot miss the next chapter. It's going to blow your mind. Pound that like button until your finger breaks. Feed the algorithm so everyone can experience this crazy ride. Flood the comments with your theories, your screams, your oh my gods. Let me know you're out there and you're as hooked as I am. Share this video with 10 of your friends who deserve to have their minds completely scrambled. Don't wait another second. They need to see this. Only the real fans understand what's at stake. You've made it this far. Now it's time to show your support. Do it now.